Welcome, everyone. We are glad you are here to learn about the many ways that MFS executive leadership is mobilizing voters and civic engagement. We hope today's panel discussion will spark your imagination about how you can too empower your community towards active and transformation civic engagement. My name is Anthony Bryant. I serve as the Government Affairs Associate at Metropolitan Family Services. We mobilize the agency's staff, clients, and leadership to provide strategic support to one another and empower the communities we serve. We advocate for policies that advance human rights, achieve social justice, equip families and communities with the knowledge and tools to learn, earn, heal, and thrive. We are here today because MFS has launched its first voter registration campaign this summer with the goal of having everyone reach their greatest potential and positively impact the communities we serve. We welcome MFS colleagues to express their concerns and hopes through civic engagement and at the ballot box as one way to impact their communities and claim the value of their voice. Before we jump in, a few housekeeping. I put a prompt to introduce yourself by dropping your name, program area, and center. And please drop in the chat something you care about in your community or an issue you've talked about with others in your community. We will be recording today's town hall. Our panelists welcome questions towards the end, and we hope to have discussions about all things civic engagement. If you have a question you'll like answered, please add it to the chat, and we'll and who you're addressing it to, or raise your hand and unmute yourself when you're called upon. Now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming our moderator for the day. And I would turn things over to you.
Great, thanks, Anthony, and welcome everyone. Thanks again for being here. We wanted to introduce our panelists first and foremost and get to know who is serving on the panel with you. As Anthony said, keep those questions going in your mind, and after some moderated discussion, we'll open that up to your questions later on. To my panelists, I will say that I've got some questions prepared. I'll direct some of them to one of you in particular. Others will just have open discussion. And if a fellow panelist has an answer, provides an answer, but you want to add to that, feel free to jump in as well. Let's take a minute to get to know each other. Would you guys, each of the panelists, introduce yourselves, sharing your name, your role at Metropolitan, and who you had your most recent civically engaged conversation with? So I'll give you a minute to think about that, and I'll introduce myself first. My name is Ann Vanderweel, and I serve as the Director of Government Affairs here at Metropolitan. And most of the time I'm working out of HQ. However, I have the opportunity to get around to most of our centers, which I love to do too. And my most recent civically engaged conversation was over breakfast this morning with my daughter. So, Vanessa, can I turn over to you?
Sure. My name is Vanessa Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director at Southeast Center. My most recent conversation civically was with a community partner over environmental justice issues that are concerning in our Southeast area. We participated in their first environmental fair and really talking about how we can educate our community about the different companies that are coming into our community. So that was my last conversation.
Great. Rick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Rick Estrada. I'm President and CEO at Metropolitan Family Services. My civically engaged conversation, the last one must have been yesterday with my wife, who is very actively and civically engaged, and we were just talking about how to provide better services for the asylum seekers and those immigrants that are migrants crossing the U.S. border to the south, and we were just kind of going back and forth of what could be done. So that was the last one.
Thanks. How about you, Kanu?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kanu Kumare. I work in the Metropolitan Peace Initiatives Center as its chief policy lead. My most recent civically engaged conversation was with our CP4P coalition of organizations about this MFS voter registration campaign and how they too can engage with some of our registration partners to play a role and benefit from more voter engagement in their designated communities. Good to see everyone.
Great. And how about you, Julia? Oh, we are not able to hear you. There you are. We've got you now.
You got me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry if I cut in and out. I'm having sound issues this morning, so I'm not sure how to navigate this. I'm Julia. I'm the volunteer and outreach coordinator for all of Metropolitan, so I get to visit all of the centers. My most civically engaged conversations happen every time I talk to my daughter who lives in Pennsylvania. So I live here. So we always, Pennsylvania is a big swing state. So I like to know what's going on in her world over there. So lots of stuff that are relevant here is relevant there, and how we can make connections and continue to move things forward in both our communities.
Great. Would you mind sharing, Julia, how you are, and Kanu, how you engaged in the voter registration campaign, your roles there?
At Metropolitan?
Well, what is your, like, in our specific voter registration campaign? I know you signed up and volunteered for a couple of different roles. If you could just explain those a little bit.
Sure. I signed up to renew my deputy registrar certificate so I can help register people to vote, which I think is extremely important. And I've signed up to 2 tables. I'm going to visit Vanessa's site and also at Midway. I see Vanessa's there, and you're all at Midway. So those are the 2 places I'm going to be registering folks to vote. I think it's really important to get everybody here register at Metropolitan registered to vote, and I'm also keeping an eye on how I can continue to register people to vote outside of Metropolitan.
Great. And Kanu, I know you spoke to already working with our CP4P partners, but I don't know if you want to share a little bit about the ad hoc committee and being a member of that, or the advocacy task force. Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. When we talk about advocacy, it is basically taking a position on a particular issue. One of the pillars of, in jargon, one of the public policy pillars, if you will, raising awareness by taking a position on a particular issue. We in MPI coordinated, as many of you know, a coalition of 15 to 25 organizations across 27 of most gun violent communities. These organizations have what we refer to as kind of license to operate, or they employ credible messengers when it comes to reducing gun violence and intervening. And so if they can be credible messengers to mitigate gun violence, whether it's through intervening or preventing acts of gun violence, they can also be credible messengers when it comes to using the ballot box. There's a strong relationship between the prevalence of gun violence and voter turnout. When you look at communities across the city, those communities with the lowest voter turnout are usually experiencing the most havoc when it comes to a myriad of services that our entire agency provides, whether it's violence intervention, childcare, domestic violence. And so what better way to engage our communities, engage our partnering organizations, where communities on the ground are the leading voice to promote voter registration, voter turnout in a way that mitigates some of the symptoms and problems that we all are tasked with facing and trying to mitigate every day.
Thanks, Kanu. That's a great introduction to one of the ways that we think about what civic engagement is. Just want to open it up to other panelists. If you have other thoughts that you want to add to Kanu, what does that mean to you? When we say the word civic engagement, what does that look like in your mind?
In my mind, civic engagement is activity that happens in a political marketplace or an exchange or a forum where citizens or businesses demand or express the need for goods and services, and government is tasked with providing them. We know it happens on various levels. Some of the examples that were given, whether it's highlighting the need for services with your loved one or your daughter, or even in more of a formal situation when it comes to some of the work that government affairs or public policy engages in with elected officials, working in concert with and on behalf of the communities in which we work, the residents who receive those services directly to increase their quality of life.
Yeah, and I'll go next. Thank you for that, Kanu. For me, we could be civically engaged in so many different ways, right? We could be on local school council and be civically engaged in that way. We could just be part of our place of worship's council. We could serve there. We could be civically engaged everywhere. But I think specifically in the effort we're trying to take on now and getting out the vote is beginning with the Boston Tea Party. And I'm sure way before then, that was civic engagement. People were saying this is something that's important to us and we cannot be taxed if we're not represented. And so in this country, we have fought and died, and some of us got the opportunity to vote, but not all of us. And then we continued to fight for that. And then we had, eventually we got to a point where every one of us could vote now. And yet there's also challenges to specific people and their ability to vote. So for us taking this on, I think there's no more important thing that we can do than to give people the opportunity to vote. They already have it. Now let's exercise it. And we just want to give folks that little nudge. And honestly, while it matters who you vote for, it matters more that you vote and that you express that right that we all have. I think what Kanu just mentioned a little bit ago, in communities that have the highest voter turnout, they also tend to be some of the safest communities, and you have to wonder why. And I think it begins with they feel engaged, they feel some ownership of the process. Even if you think it's minor, that one vote of a country of 400 million or however big we are now, that one vote, it's just what we can do to feel part of this great country. And then we bring it down to the local level where we can be part of this city. And it's, I think, again, and repeating myself, no more important thing that we could do it and give people the opportunity to exercise that vote. And as Kanu mentioned again, where people don't vote, it's because they're not feeling welcome. They're not feeling like they're part of the community. They haven't been invited enough. They don't feel like it matters. And so it's, I think, an opportunity for us to let everyone know that their vote does matter. And let's get it out.
I think for me, civic engagement is, if we break it down more into the community level, it's really engaging in activities that really promote the health of a community, things that you care about. So if food insecurity, something that you really care about, is looking at what organizations kind of work with that and volunteer your time, talent, or treasure to those kind of organizations so that you are improving the lives of the community. If it is on a local school council, if it's on a park district, if it is working with environmental justice, engaging in peaceful protests, there's a lot of ways to civically engage individually, especially where it really counts in your individual community. So to me, really civic engagement begins with the individual really seeking out what do you really care about and finding ways that you can connect with other like-minded people, organizations that you can provide your time, talent, or treasures.
Thanks. Vanessa, who showed you that civic engagement is important?
Actually, my paternal aunt, we had a joke when I was growing up that she was a fierce advocate for the rights of especially Latino people in our community, because in the 70s, people didn't really understand what their rights were. So she advocated. And I remember one we had a summer barbecue and this man hit our fence. And she actually went with him to the hospital to make sure that he was getting the proper care. So she was always very civically engaged in the community. She worked for LULAC, which is the League of United Latin American Citizens, and making sure that people understood what scholarships were available to them. So she was really the one that really kind of taught me from a very early age what to be civically engaged is. My dad also, although my father was an immigrant here, he came to the United States from Honduras when he was quite a young man, and he actually did not become a citizen until he was in his 60s. But my father was very learned in terms of the history of the United States and voting. That's something that he really made us understand, that voting is our right, and that we need to exercise our right at all times. So I learned from my father and from my paternal aunt.
It's beautiful. Rick, can you tell us about the relationship in your mind between civic engagement and justice?
Sure, I'll do my best. So for those of you out on the Zoom sphere, we are coming to you from the Midway Center. And today we're going to cut the ribbon on the expansion that we had that we did on Midway. And by the way, it's beautiful here. I hadn't walked through the front door of Midway in a long time. I came to the side door in the past, but walking through here, it's just gorgeous what we have been able to do here. And the reason I bring that up, Ann, is because it was through civic engagement that we were able to convince our elected officials to invest $5 million into this center from our own tax dollars. So we convinced them, we told them what we were going to do here, increase mental health services, continue to improve our early childhood development services and administration here, and all the other services that happen at Midway. I just named a few, but those were the two primary ones that we talked to our elected officials about. It wasn't easy to get them to agree, but it was because we were so well organized, because of the board here, the community board at Midway, because of the leadership at Midway, because of our constant push on our elected officials, because they know that we have a huge footprint here, serving approximately 15,000 people here. Because of that, the elected officials took notice. They know that these 15,000 plus people that we serve have the opportunity to vote and express their own civic opinion through engagement, and that really helped. And so for me, connecting it to justice is because this center, we're working on social justice every single day. And again, whether it's DD coordination and support that we offer across the Chicagoland area, or whether it's the supervised visitation, we do it with the justice framework in mind. So that's just one example for me of how they're connected.
Thanks for that. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, just ditto, in line with what everyone else said. I'm a big fan of metaphors, and I feel like if civic engagement is the spoon, justice is the food. And one could argue that our communities are starving because there is no civic engagement, at least not on the level that there should be. And sometimes the food that we have at the ready isn't necessarily the most healthy for our communities. But I think ultimately you have to be at the table. You know the saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And even still, when you're unaware, sometimes you'll be used as a utensil to eat your community alive. And so it's important that you are literally and literally civically engaged, and with a big enough spoon to scoop up food that heals our communities in the multiple ways that MFS and the teams go about doing that. And systemically, when we talk about getting rid of some of the bad elements that persist in our communities. And so.
I love that, Kenny. I'm never gonna look at a table setting the same way. Thanks for that. Just a reminder, everybody, we've got a few more questions with our panelists that I'll be asking, and then we're gonna open it up to you. So get your questions ready. You can open it up to the whole panel, or if there's somebody in particular that you wanna direct your question, we can do that too. So while you're thinking about that, Julie, I have a question. I know that you signed up to be part of the registration campaign because you're passionate about getting people registered to vote. Can you tell us about a time when you were successful in engaging someone around registering to vote? And then we want to keep it exciting. So tell us about when it didn't go so well.
One that didn't go so well?
Yeah, maybe start with the bad and we'll end with the good.
I don't know that I have an experience of when we engage people to vote, we don't do it on partisan lines. So while you open this up to encourage people to use their voice, you're encouraging people from all sides to do so. So I think really you have to be aware that you're going to engage in some people that have very different ideas than you do, and that can definitely be a negative. But in the end, part of what I think is truly civic engagement is really just at a fundamental level, talking with your neighbors. Everybody knows what they know, and they know the things that surround them immediately. But for example, if you don't know why having an ID is a barrier to some people to vote, you may say, well, just show your ID. What's the big deal to vote? It's Illinois. In Illinois, you don't have to show your ID, your identification, to actually go and vote. You have to show it to register, which is different than showing it when you go and vote. But that is a barrier to some people in some communities. So I think at the very fundamental level, talking with people and understanding what those barriers are and why they're barriers to people is also a form of civic engagement. And just understanding people that are different than you and why what they do is a challenge, and what they can't do and how they can't engage is it's part of what we do, why we do, and why we do it. We try and engage as many people as we can. So that's definitely something that you're definitely going to probably engage in conversation with some people that don't agree with you. But we want everybody to have a voice and use that voice to vote.
Thanks. So I'm going to throw out to the panel, at the last voter registration event I was at in DuPage, I was asked, well, I don't think it really matters. That's why I'm not registering. I don't think it matters. I think government's all corrupt. So what would you say in response to that?
I think that if you and millions of other people feel the same way, it is going to have an impact, a huge impact on who is in power and who is going to fight for your rights. As we see in today's world, a lot of our rights are being slowly dismantled and taken away. And it's extremely important that you vote one way or the other, but you have to vote to make sure that your voice is heard. And if you and many millions of others feel the same way, then it is going to have an impact. The low voter turnout really has a huge impact. If we're looking at the Supreme Court, we're looking at local courts, we're looking at decisions that are being made in Florida and in Texas. So if you are multiplied by millions of people, it is going to have a serious impact.
Thanks for those specific examples of why it matters and what difference it can make in somebody's own everyday experience. Does anybody have anything else they want to add to that?
Well, I think
Yeah.
Well, you go first, kind of.
No, you go ahead.
All right. I think we all know people who feel just like that it doesn't matter. We may even have family members who, in fact, I have multiple family members, like it doesn't matter. It's all the same. It doesn't matter who's mayor, who's governor, who's president. Nothing changes for me. And I think your question, for example, was they're all corrupt. I think corruption feeds and breeds on the lack of civic engagement. And you've heard the other kind of saying that we get the government we deserve. And that's usually is applied to because we're not engaged. And if we are fully engaged, I have deep faith in this country and the people that live in this country. If we were all fully engaged, I think we'd really have the government we deserve, which would be a more inclusive, a better, more responsive, a less corrupt government. And it's why we're doing this work. I mean, we need that kind of representation across all levels. And so I agree with the basic premise of, yeah, there's a whole lot of corruption in government, but that's because we're not engaged. And we need to change that by being more engaged. We are the watchdogs through our vote, through our engagement. And so we deserve better government, and let's organize to have better government.
I think the idea of this country.
No, go ahead, Julia.
Oh, sorry. I think the idea of this country is it's a work in progress. And if we look back at the things that we haven't had, for example, in my lifetime, women weren't allowed to have a credit card. There are many things that have changed over my lifetime and everybody's lifetime on this call. So, and they have changed because of engagement from people, from large groups of people. So, it doesn't have to be something as big as women being able to have a credit card. It can be something small, but all that progress and change was made because a small group of people decided what was right for a larger group of people until the larger group of people started saying, wait a minute, and then got involved. And as Rick mentions, if more than 9% engaged, we really would have a truer representation of what this country really looks like, and better representation. It would be less corrupt. It would be able to police itself better and take care of that corruption and have a more fair representation across this country.
Thanks, Kanu. Did everybody say everything you wanted to say?
Yeah, generally, I could talk about this all day. My commitment to civic engagement was part of it, as someone else said, informed by, my household. And my family used to tell me, and as we're talking, my dad's ringing in my ear. And he would say it constantly ad nauseum. And he would say, 1% of the world makes things happen. He said 9% of the world watch things happen. And 90% of the world looks up one day and asks the question, what the hell just happened? And there are people, as we're all well aware, amongst that 90% who say or act as though voting doesn't matter until, of course, they lose something. And when they do, the first thing they ask is, what just happened? I can just talk from my work in MPI. And as I said earlier, we work in 27 of the most gun violent communities. And I said there's a relationship between voter turnout and gun violence. And the lower the turnout, the higher the gun violence. And I just don't understand how someone or a group of people say an activity is useless when 90% of the audience hasn't even tried to participate in it. It's like someone saying exercise is useless, when they don't even work out or never even tried to work out. So I think before we say voting doesn't work, or you hear someone say that, I think folk could be surprised to see what happens when voting in the communities we serve takes place on a large scale. And we've tried everything else. And we've seen instances where voter turnout in most of the communities in which we work, robust voter turnout ends up being a win for those communities. And we've seen that statewide. We talk about the Safety Act that has played a role in eliminating cash bail, the first state in the country to do that. We've also seen the bad side of what happens when elections have consequences. I believe the last president was able to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, and we've seen the abolishing of the constitutional right to abortion. And we've also seen the elimination of one of the most successful on-ramps to economic success over the last 50 years for Black people, Latinx people, and specifically women. in the form of affirmative action. And so again, folk don't think voting matters until they lose something.
Thank you. I know we've talked about who showed us how to be civically engaged. Some of us have. I'm curious if there are other, Julia or Rick, if you want to share who helped you, where you noticed civic engagement, what inspired you? Who inspired you?
I'll let Rick go first for sure.
Thanks, Julia. Well, growing up, nobody voted in my household because they couldn't. Right, my parents came here as immigrants, and so they couldn't vote. And so it wasn't at home that I learned that. It was in high school where we had voter registration campaigns at a place called Quigley South. And I was 18 years old as a senior. And I remember clearly that my colleagues were getting out to vote, but I still couldn't vote at the time. I was, by that point, a legal resident in the country, but I had not spent the 5 years necessary to then apply for citizenship. And so I couldn't vote. So it became pretty clear to me that there was something really important going on that my peers could do that I couldn't. And so first chance I got, I went and applied for citizenship and was granted citizenship. And then I've voted in every election ever since, because it was, it's kind of says when you don't have something, sometimes you lose it, and sometimes you just never had it because of your circumstances, and then you appreciate it more. So for me, it was basic high school civics.
Mm-hmm. Julia, if you can hold your thought 1 minute, I want to follow up on that a little bit, because as we've been doing this voter registration campaign, we've encountered a number of families who are in that situation. Their citizenship is on hold. They're pursuing it. They don't have the right now. What are other ways that they can civically engage if they don't have the right, if they're waiting for the right to vote? How can we encourage them to be involved civically other than that?
Yeah, there was also a question by the about what is the plan in promoting engagement, encourage people whose personal barrier is language and culture. And so I think these two are related. And one, it's language, culture, but it's also the inability to get out and vote because you don't yet qualify for it. And so for us, two things. One, the plan is make sure that we have bilingual people that are doing this work that we're talking about. And in every one of our centers, we have people who are bilingual. As you know, we do have bilingual people everywhere in our 10 centers at MFS. And so it's just make sure that we are diligent and planful in how we're going to do this. And again, bilingual in multiple languages, because the people out in the Howard Evanston Community Center know that I think your folks speak 80 or so different languages out there. While we're not going to be completely bilingual in 80, we have clients who speak the languages and can translate. So those kinds of things are going to be employed for sure. But your question, Ann, was about how to be engaged, and I think I touched on it. But you can be a local school council member and not be a citizen of the country. You can be involved in getting others to vote and not be a citizen of the country. You can be involved in volunteering all over the place in places of worship or organizations like MFS and other smaller nonprofits. So there's a lot of ways to engage. And I think my mom was, again, a perfect example, a Spanish dominant speaker who went as an adult and got her GED. She had to get it in Spanish because she didn't speak English. And then finally, after many years, had the opportunity to vote. And so she also is a voter now. But she was very engaged. Also, she was an organizer early on for the Benito Juarez High School in the Pilsen community. She was a supporter of Rudy Lozano's campaign and Harold Washington's campaign as this, immigrant Spanish-speaking woman. So many ways.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I also would add that You also can still meet with your legislative or elected official. You are a community resident and they need to care about what you care about in the community that they're serving. So thanks for those ideas. Julia, who inspired you to be civically engaged? And sorry, I keep interrupting you. I have one more question and then we're going to turn it over to everyone else. So go ahead, Julia. Thanks for waiting.
Sure. As I mentioned in my profile, my mother took me to vote as young as I can remember. But one of the reasons it really resonated is my mother, I grew up in Portage Park on the northwest side of over by the North Center. And very, very, very white neighborhood. My mother decided that me and my younger sisters needed a little bit more diversity in our education, and the teachers that taught us, and then our peers. And so they sent us to Walt Disney Magnet School. About that time is when Harold Washington was running for mayor. And as one does, when you're politicking, you go and reach out to communities. And my neighborhood, that was my church, the church that my parents went to, which also happened to be the church that Martin Luther King had gone to, and had been received a lot of pushback from the neighborhood that I lived in. That's before my time, but now here I am, and Harold Washington is running. And I remember as a kid being out there, he was in the church engaging with the community, and there were picketers outside the church and in my neighborhood, and traffic was stopped and people were picketing that this man was there, trying to represent Chicago and represent the city. And my parents were voters, and they were going to vote for Harold Washington. And we had a window. We didn't have yard signs at the time. People put pictures in their window of who they were going to vote for. And someone on our block had their windows broken. So my parents took that sign down. I just remember being infuriated. Like, okay, if they break our windows, they break our windows. This is important to show it. And I remember just being a kid thinking about that and being so embarrassed about and for my neighborhood and my community. And my mom just kept saying, who are these people? Now, I don't go to church with any of these people, but she went to church with a few of them. So it really resonated, and it still makes, I can remember it vividly, how angry I was standing in the street that I was so familiar with. There's people picketing the Harold Washington. So to this day, I brought my kids with me to every election and that I voted in, which is all of them, local and national. And my kids vote today, so in every election. So in fact, they've been election officials more times than they've been eligible to vote, legally of age to vote. So I think I've got them hooked.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing the passion that is involved in a lot of this work for so many of us. Last question. What have I not asked about that you came this morning thinking you wanted to share? Is there anything? And it's open to all of you.
I like to bring up the fact that I think we need to really educate our youth about the importance of voting and the importance of their voice. Many youth, I think, historically have been kind of suppressed and, probably have the same feeling that they don't have representation in the government, or why should I even bother, because it just doesn't matter. But I think it really is incumbent upon all of us as adults to really promote their voice and looking at what's going on in our country right now, and it is going to have repercussions in their life and in their lifetime. And it's extremely important to vote, and not to only think of it as a vote for a person, but really as how are we going to improve our country, and how are we going to seek the rights that we need to pursue a life of happiness that is given to other people, and not to, especially the BIPOC community. So I think youth is where we really need to concentrate. We really need to encourage them and show them the importance of their voice. If they got together and really, voted for the candidate that really represents their best interests. So I think it's extremely important that we really concentrate on our youth. As I said, as growing up, my aunt and my father, that was a lesson that I learned early on, that voting is your right and that you need to enact that right at every opportunity, not just the federal government, election, but your local government, because that has the most impact on your day to day. If you have an alderman that doesn't really care about its constituents, then you're not going to get the services that you need, and they're not going to bring in economic development into your community. So I think the youth, that's where we really need to concentrate our push and our encouragement.
Thanks, Vanessa. Rick, I think you
Yeah,
had,
this is,
oh, go ahead, Kenny.
yeah, I know this isn't church, but I feel like it, when, what was just said was a kind of a Holy Ghost moment. In line with that, there's so many efforts to restrict voter access. I read somewhere where more than 39 states have more than 400 bills to restrict voter access. And in terms of making voting more accessible, I've seen in other countries where there are mandatory civic engagement classes from grade 3 through 12. Not as a part of history, but its own class. I've seen, for example, in Turkey, where by the time Turks are 18, they're literally salivating to vote. They know more about American issues than Americans. I was Googling situations that they were asking me about. So in line with what was just indicated, certainly civic engagement classes early. I think we should look at online voting. If you can go to your bank account online or with your phone, I don't see why you shouldn't be able to vote using your phone. And I know this might be a little risky or radical, but there are several countries that have what they refer to as compulsory voting, where it's mandatory as a condition of your citizenship, you're required by law to vote. And we've seen instances where Americans are required to do something like pay taxes. You're required to go to school until you're 18 years old. Until the early 70s, if you were drafted, you were required to go potentially serve in a war. I also think we should look at changing the day change election day from, say, Tuesdays to maybe Saturdays. That would give more people an opportunity to actually go. We know that Tuesday is an outdated, when they came up with Tuesday, that was in line with kind of agricultural mandates. That was the day when folk were less likely to work. And we live obviously in a different time now. And then lastly, focusing on polling centers rather than polling places, meaning you can vote at any polling center in your state. It shouldn't have to be a designated place or city. And I think that those 5 points would make voting far more accessible and go a long way with combating efforts to restrict voting.
Rick or Julie, anything you wanted to add before we turn it over?
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat someone mentioning about judges and reiterating what Vanessa said, that change can on the local level can happen really fast when you engage in vote local. It's really, really important. And I know that a lot of times when people do vote, they often don't research early. They let go of the election of judges, and they don't research them, or they just vote randomly across judges of a name that maybe, similar to theirs, or I don't know how people do it. But I know that there are many, many ways that you can research judges there. This is an extremely important part of your vote. And I find the best way to do it is really to just find the bar associations that really resonate with your philosophy and personal philosophy and how you live your life, and look at more than one of them, cross-reference them, and find out so-and-so didn't fill this out. And you'll find out why. why. And these impact everyday life. And it is such an important part of your vote that I think far too often gets ignored. And, it can be really researched and, it's so easy to get information now. It can really be done in about a half an hour. You can bring paper in with you to the ballot box and take it off as you go down. It's an extremely important part of your vote.
Rick, you want to close this out?
Not in the way that I think you're thinking in, but we need to make it clear that this is a nonpartisan effort from MFS. And so, yeah, while many people at MFS completely disagree with the recent decisions from the Supreme Court, I'm sure that not everyone does. And it's your right, and you too need to vote and express your right. And for us, we just want to make certain that you get out to vote and that you get your family out to vote, that you get your neighbors and friends out to vote, that you exercise this right that people have died for, and whatever opinions you have, they are yours and you should express them. That's how I end this part.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, I know that the chat has been very lively, which is really exciting to see. So I'm sure you all have a lot of questions or a lot to add. I saw that Charles Hardwick raised his hand earlier. So Charles, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa, who's going to guide this section.
Okay, thank you. It was more about my personal experience with civic engagement as a younger person versus my now experience in civic engagement as an older adult. I was one of the ones who did not think that my vote counted. And I think everyone in my household felt that way. Of course, I was born in the 50s, and so we went through a lot. And we didn't think our vote mattered. But I realized that I was organizing before I even understood what organizing meant. And I was being civically involved in a negative way in my community and discovered that, and then started being civically involved in my community in a positive way. And it led me to, actually I sit on the board for Civic Leadership Foundation, and we do curriculum development for middle schools. And I want to go back to someone who said civic leadership should start with the youth. And so we are empowering youth that you are leaders in your community, that you can come up with ideas, and we even help them get your block together and everybody come out and just start picking up paper. Put garbage cans on the end of your block, just to keep your block clean. And then when it comes to voting, helping young people know early on that voting is very important. It does make a difference. And I'm a very strong advocate for when I'm doing my workshops. I also, Rick, I want to mention that it's also nonpartisan. We don't tell people who to vote for, but we do show people how important it is just to sit in our workshops. It's funded by government. And without the right government, we wouldn't be able to serve the populations that we serve. So right there, it shows that our vote counts. But I think the larger picture with the voting and civically involvement is that we register people to vote, but I don't think we show them how to vote, because I've seen people go in these booths and they know the primary people, especially when you're talking about national elections. They know the presidents, the vice presidents, and the mayor and stuff like that. But when it comes to the judge, the water reclamation, and all those different things, people have no idea who they are, what they mean, and also voting for judges. And I've actually seen people vote for judges or talk to people who voted for judges that they didn't agree with what that judge stood for, but they didn't know. So I think educating people, first getting the voter registration campaigns moving faster and sooner than we have been. Let's not wait until it's almost election time to start getting people registered to vote. But then having workshops, creating workshops, and these are just ideas, I don't have the formula to them, but creating workshops to actually help people to understand that large card that goes in the machine and who are those people on that card, and are they a part of your partisan or not? So I just wanted to put that in there, and I just really want to reiterate how important it is to get our young people civically engaged.
Great. Thank you, Charles.
Great. I do know that we have, sorry, you're on. Oh, no, sorry, they can hear you. Okay, great. So first I thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Alyssa. I'm a government affairs associate for Metropolitan Family Services. I'm based out of HQ, but will often, you will see me at Midway or North from time to time. So great to see everyone's faces today. We do want to open the floor for additional questions, and I know we definitely have one existing in the chat. So I'll start by giving this to all the panelists. We had a question, particularly, how do we build relationships with elected officials on a regular basis? My hope is to have a neighborhood that looks good, feels safe, and has jobs for people at any working age within that neighborhood. Thank you in advance for the acknowledgement of my question.
Yeah, I think that was Yula. And so, Yula, here's what I would say to that. A lot of times, let's say we are MFS or another organization. I've heard multiple elected officials say this to people, and I think Kanu would agree with this, and others that have worked, Seth Rich, I see, and others that have worked with elected officials. You don't call them when you need something from them. Don't let that be your first call, right? Because they're like, while it's their duty to help, they're like, well, who's this person? And so when it comes to developing relationships, is we need to really be intentional about it. You're going to see that here at Midway in about an hour or so. We'll be with several of our elected officials here, continuing to build a relationship with them. In many ways, the elected officials that are coming today weren't actually the elected officials that helped us secure this $5 million grant, but they are the elected officials today. And you know what they say about credit, you should give it away. And we will give them the credit that they deserve as sitting in that position, and acknowledge them and continue that partnership. And the reality is we didn't ask them for anything. We just asked them to come and take some credit. And so if you could give them some credit early on for basic, easy things, thank them for the work that's happening at your center the first time, just thank them. And then continue to build that relationship, know them by name, know their chief of staff. And when it's time to make a major ask, they'll be a lot more receptive. And they're more receptive even so when you bring people who live in their district and their ward, when you bring our clients and participants in our programs, when you bring them with you, they're even more receptive at that point. And then the final thing is between the people sitting on this side of the room, Alyssa, Anthony, Kanu, and Vanessa, myself, and then several others that I mentioned, we pretty much know almost every elected official. And so we could begin developing or making introductions for you if you needed them. We intentionally do this for the executive directors. And then we count on them to nurture those relationships. If you want to be involved in that, you should talk to your executive director and be involved in those conversations as well. I can't urge you enough to be involved with them and us. And if you need introductions, we're happy to make them. Thanks, Anna. Oh, Alyssa, thank you.
Thanks, Rick. I see that we have a question from Jason in the chat. Are there guidelines on how we should talk about our employment with MFS when we are conducting unrelated civic engagement activities?
Unrelated civic engagement activities. Don't know exactly what that means, but I don't believe we have any specific guidelines, Anne, of how to talk to elected officials. I'm trying to read in between the lines, Jason. I don't know exactly what that means, but you can talk to your elected officials at any time. I mean, it's your right and duty to talk to them. In regards to working at MFS, that's up to you. If it's unrelated to MFS, that's really up to you. Sometimes that could be helpful. Sometimes it won't. You might want to check in with us because maybe there's an elected official that we know is not into a specific issue, and we at least give you a heads up. But feel free to expound on the question. We'd be happy to be more specific.
Yeah, I would say in terms of legislative engagement, obviously echoing everything that Rick said, we can definitely make introductions, and I also think it's important for them to get to know you themselves rather than through someone else. And this is a common question from residents and participants that work with some of our organizations with whom we work at CP4P. And I tell them three things. I say, number one, you just say, I'm interested in what you're doing. You go to their offices and you say, I'm interested in what you're doing. I want to be involved. How can we make that happen? Chances are you're not going to be able to have that FaceTime with the elected, but certainly, as Rick said, their staff, their chief of staff, some of their outreach staff, they're always looking for local residents to engage with and to collaborate with as an individual or as part of an organization that they want to partner with. And so you're not necessarily asking them for something, you're offering, you're making yourself available for things they have going on. And in the process, you get to know them. You find out what they're doing. And that might even spur you to get even more involved, including but not limited to running for office. And we've seen many instances where that's how current elected officials got in the game, if you will.
The biggest thing we have to offer is our expertise. They can't know everything, and they don't have a big enough staff. So if you are passionate about early childhood development or DV or housing or any of the great work that we do here, that you know more than they do. And so you have something to offer. And when they're putting together a bill, a piece of legislation, when they're trying to change a statute, you have expertise that you can offer them. And I'm telling you, I've seen it hundreds of times, and that's not an exaggeration, that organizations like MFS or Shriver Center or Heartland or the many that have essentially written a piece of legislation and have handed it to elected officials. It certainly changes a little bit along the way, but the essence of a bill or a statute is written by the advocate. And so we have that to offer. We have our expertise to offer, and don't sell yourself short. We collectively have a ton to offer.
Agreed.
As volunteer coordinator, I would be missing out on the opportunity to say, if you go and introduce yourself to your alderperson, to ask them how that you can volunteer and engage in that way. And there are many ways to engage civically, but like Rick mentioned, lending your expertise in the community that you would live in is one of the best ways to do it.
And I would like to add, here at Government Affairs, we have, my bad. Okay, can everyone hear me now? Okay. Here at Government Affairs with Metro, we have a advocacy task force where we reach out to the advocacy task force members as well as the executive director members to set up in-district legislative meetings. So right now, this summer, North, Southwest, DuPage, as well as Midway, has been doing a great job at meeting with public officials, discussing some of their programs, as well as some of just upcoming events and or issues that may come up at those centers. I know with Eula's question, we're definitely working with FOC and Calumet to meet with some of those local public officials. So here at Metro, at Government Affairs, you all can definitely get involved with, connecting with us, with the ATF, and or this voter registration drive to connect with some of your public officials.
Thanks, Anthony. I think that we're pretty much at time, so I do want to thank everyone for joining us today, and of course, our panelists for being so engaging. We talked a lot about civic engagement and voting and why they're important for metropolitan families and the agency at large. All summer, as you might have heard in some of the feedback we've gotten, but Metropolitan staff are tabling at voter registration tables at community events all summer, and each week we're sharing profiles in civic engagement. So you can hear firsthand from other colleagues of yours on why voting matters to them. We also want to recognize the value of voting takes on so many different meanings depending on your life experience. And so these stories that we're sharing each week, including some of the ones that we heard today, build upon our relationships with one another and also foster a greater sense of community among Metropolitan. So thank you for those that are participating in that. You can support your colleagues' work by spreading awareness around the campaign on social media. I think Anne had dropped a few things in the chat around this, but each week the communication team is posting messages on the campaign and highlighting these community events through September 19th, National Voter Registration Day. So you can find those posts on Metropolitan social media pages and the Advocacy Action Center, which is on the staff intranet page. So once again, this session has been recorded and will be open to public view. But if you have any questions about the voter registration campaign, please feel free to reach out to a member of the government affairs team, including Anne, Anthony, or I, and I'll actually just drop my email in the chat. But thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.